we have to understand that these three thinkers, Nietzsche, Weber, and Carl Schmitt, in order to understand how a long period of transformation, of development, of new political ideas, of establishment of the Western civilizations as liberal democracies came into crisis. Came into crisis at the beginning of the 20th century. Came into crisis. You know, there is this, we still believe in this liberal democratic principle because after World War II, still liberal democracies prevailed. We see a crisis today again of the principles of liberal democracies, but this crisis we also had it at the beginning of the 20th century. We had at the beginning of the 20th century because for more than 300 years at the beginning of the 20th century, we had built this system, which we call liberal democratic system, you know, in which you have civil rights, political rights, democracy, sovereign popular sovereignty, and so on. But by the beginning of the 20th century, this was put in crisis. This was put in crisis because we have thinkers such as Nietzsche, Weber, and Schmitt, who say this rationalization, this rational principle are not grasping the essence of humanity, and at the same time, in the political level, we had, you know, a fight against liberalism. We had a fight against liberalism on two different sides, one from the left and one from the right. On the left, we had, you know, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, who waged a communist revolution against liberalism in the biggest country of the world and established, you know, the Soviet Union as a great power in the world, which was a communist power against liberalism. On the other hand, we had the growth of, you know, far-right principles. And so today we can introduce the other topic which is very relevant for the 20th century, which we can call totalitarianism. Totalitarianism is a general concept to understand what fascism, Nazism, and, you know, the extremization of the nationalist principles, So let me see if I have some slides about this. So we will study this through the thinker who founded the concept of totalitarianism, which is Hannah Arendt. But before entering into Hannah Arendt, let's try to understand what happened in the 20th century. The 20th century is the most bloody century in the history of humanity, because science had a progress, but we use science, we apply technology to kill human beings in extermination camps, in World War I, in World War II, because during this period we have, you know, kind of weapons which has a level of technological development that we never imagined before, and you have the possibility, even, you know, with the atomic bomb, to destroy the entire humanity through a technological artifact like the atomic bomb. So this was the bloodiest century in the world. And as we see, we have a first reaction against liberalism, which was waged by the Soviets, but mostly in Europe was waged by fascism, Nazism. What are these movements? The fascism, Nazism. What are these movements? What is the concept which is the foundation of this political ideas? It's the concept of nation, nationalism. So we already introduced the concept of nation with the French Revolution, because we see that for the first time with the French Revolution we have this idea of the nation, which of this link between the nation and the state. Which nation must have a state, and which state must belong to a nation. So we had this idea of nation, which was, you know, what is a nation? What is a nation? Nation is, it's an entity of equal citizens. This was during the French Revolution. It's an entity of equal citizens who share the same rights or as the same representatives. So during the French Revolution, we have a very political, legal idea of the nation. But then during the 19th century, and mostly during the 20th century, this idea of nation took, new implications, because then we say, what is a nation? A nation, it's, they share a language. There is some cultural heritage which defines a nation. A nation shares that same cultural heritage, shares a kind of, same history, and then shares a language. And then we focus more and more and more and more and more and more, and then we say, it has the same blood. There is the same blood which defines a nation. And so the nation came to be linked to the concept of the race. The nations are somehow the effects of the race. This is why, for example, Adolf Hitler has to build up a theory of the German race as the descendants of the Aryans, and to promote this theory of the vital space. The German race as the descendants of the Aryans, they need, a vital space, and so we have to invade Poland because we need a space to live, like Israel nowadays, they say, yeah, we have to take parts of Lebanon, we have to take parts, we have to take the West Bank, we have to take, everywhere, because we need a space for our race to, grow. So there is a theory of a race. So the nation, which was born as an abstract, legal, political concept, referring to the state, referring to the equal citizens, referring to citizenship, then it became more and more a cultural concept, and then it became linked to the idea of race, a biological idea of race, this idea that races, they exist in biology, and that there are hierarchy between different races, and that the idea of the nation was linked to the idea of the race. So nationalism came to be entrenched with the idea of racism. The Jewish were the first one to suffer the consequences of racism, because they were considered a different race within the race of Germany, within the European nations, and so they started to be persecuted. So we have the build-up of this racist statement, which were developed through nationalism. If you think, liberal ideas are global, because when you think the foundation of liberalism is John Locke, natural rights that belong to all human beings, is the idea that all human beings are born equal, So it's, liberalism, it's humanity. Every human must be endowed with human rights that belong to anybody. Doesn't matter, your race, your nationality, where you were born, and so on and so forth. So it's, it's a global idea, liberalism. Everybody must be recognized with human rights, and these human rights must be protected with the rules of laws, with the rule of law, with the division of power. And if all human beings are equal, they need, to participate in the state, in the sovereignty of the state, and they must be recognized, political rights everywhere in the world. So these are global ideas, because we think they apply to all systems in the world. So already in the beginning, in the end of the 19th century, in the beginning of the 20th century, we had a process of globalization through capitalism and through liberal democracy ideas. So we started to have this system of globalization, but exactly like nowadays, we have a reaction. We see a reaction through globalization, which is waged by the ideas of nationalism. we're not all equal in the world. This idea of human beings with all human rights and so on, it's just an abstract concept. What really exists in reality are nations. We have different states, but these states are rooted in different nations, and we have to protect the legacy of this nation, the history of this nation. We have to protect our own identity. We don't want mass migration. We don't want ethnic substitution, because the nation is the first thing we have to protect. And this was the growth of, of fascist idea in Italy. Mussolini, they funded, before he was a socialist, then he funded the fascist party, which was, the defense of the of Italians as a nation, as a race, and we still have, ius sanguinis in this country. If you want to get Italian citizenship, doesn't matter if you were born here or not, if you came to school here or not, but if your ancestor, grandfathers, grandmother, they were Italians, even though you don't speak Italian, you never lived in Italy, you are entitled to request Italian citizenship, because we think, it's a thing of blood, it's in your blood, you're part of the nation. There is a Russian foundation for being Italian. So we have Mussolini established fascism, and then in Francisco Franco, also in Spain, they waged civil war against the socialists in Spain, so they established fascism in Spain, and so we have these nationalist movements all over Europe. And before also, World War I was based, on this nationalist backlash, in which, we want to see nation first. So World War I, then those countries who were defeated in World War I, even more and more strong nationalist ideas. In particular, Germany, who was defeated in World War I, had very bad conditions of peace, and the right-wing ideas of nationalism was growing hard. And so, the Nazi movement, Adolf Hitler, Eichmann, they took Goebbels, they took the ideas of fascism, and they brought to the extreme ideas, that building up a pure racist theory of Germany, of the history of Germany, and on German politics, and on the fact that if we need to protect our nation, and at any price, by any means, and if we have to exterminate, a minority that within our country is threatening our blood as a nation, we have to exterminate anybody. If we have to wage war on entire humanity to protect the German nation, we have to do it. Deutschland über alles. Germany and all the others. So, in Germany, it was the quintessential representation of this idea of the primacy of the nation. We have nationalism in Japan. We had a strong growth of nationalism, which was a reaction to liberalism, to the expansion of liberal ideas, of liberal democracy ideas, which was a reaction to the globalization of the markets, to capitalism, and so on. So if you see nowadays, it's exactly 100 years later, but you see that we have a similar kind of dynamic, because after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1889, after the fall of the division of the world, which was divided in two blocks, the socialist bloc and the capitalist bloc, the liberal democratic bloc, we saw a process during the 90s, during the 2000s, a process of globalization of the economies. We saw liberal principles promoted everywhere. We saw, transnational organizations like the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, the World Bank was taking power. There was a process of globalization, the migration flows grow very much. So we have also globalization in terms of people going everywhere. We have, countries which were colonial countries which grow up and became superpowers in this framework of the globalization, Brazil, China, India, and so on. And so we saw this process in the 90s and in the 2000s. Right now, in the last 15 years, we see a nationalist reaction, a very strong nationalist reaction to this movement, which was a movement of globalization based on the globalization of liberal democratic principles. We see that, for example, the President of the United States of America is promoting the idea of America first, which is a nationalist statement. We have, first of all, we have to protect our own nation. So, deportation of immigrants and promoting the interest of our nation, which is, based on this, he also said during this electoral campaign, no more wars everywhere in the world because we want only to focus on our own business of Americans. So, the guy is not very serious about this thing, but apart from this, it's America first. It's America first. It's not a guy who is very much concerned about the respect of human rights, democratic principles, and that is not very focused on this. It's focused on nationalist principles. America first. American nationalism. The nation. It's even, the white supremacists, they were supporting Trump because he has this, racial idea of the nation. And so on, we have this kind of movement pretty much everywhere in the world. In Japan, we have a nationalist prime minister. In Italy, we have the prime minister. It's the leader of a party which is called the Brothers of Italy. A nationalist party is leading, and we see that in France, le Front National, nationalists, they're growing up. In Germany, Alternative for Deutschland, the nationalist party is growing up. In Great Britain, we saw, the Brexit, they get out from the European Union because Nigel Farage established this nationalist movement, which is taking a lot of consensus. So we see that nowadays we're more or less in a similar situation compared to 100 years ago, because we see a growth of nationalist movements which are fighting against globalization and which are fighting against the globalization of the principles of liberal democracy. There is always, a problem with nationalist principles, because when you say first thing that I have to promote is the interest of my nation, that in the world you always have other nations. And the interest of your nations can be conflicted with the interest of another nation. And so there is a problem that when you have a lot of nationalism, you often came up with having a lot of words, because, when you have a disagreement between two different nations, the nation, they have their own state, they have their own army, and so on and so forth, and so you risk that there is war. So in these last 15 years, we have seen, comeback and growing of nationalisms, of state level power, and so on and so forth. So, and we see that nowadays in the European Union, we have two trends. The elites, those who have ruled the European Union so far, which are saying, let's go on with this integration, let's go on with the principles of globalization, liberal principles, human rights, and so on and so forth. And then we have, national governments who say, no, let's get back to a more specific focus on the national principles. So let's see how this will develop, and let's see if we will go more towards nationalist developments, or if the principle of liberal democracies will prevail, or if we will have new, different principle going on. Okay, so to go more into what fascism, Nazism, where we address this thinker, Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt, because she was the thinker who established the concept of totalitarianism. It's also finally we have, and happily we have a so Hannah Arendt. So she was born in Hanover. She grew up in a good family. She was there. She went to university. She was happy. But then, 1933, Hitler came to power, and she was forced to leave Germany. And also, we said she went to university. She studied very good philosophy in very important University of Heidelberg. So she met existentialist principles. She met existentialism. Martin Heidegger was a scholar who really studied Nietzsche very much and developed the idea of Nietzsche. So she had some very important books, but we will focus on just on two books, okay? The Origins of Totalitarianism and Eichmann in Jerusalem. So let's say something more about the origins of totalitarianism. The origins of totalitarianism. So we already had she already said a lot about what is totalitarianism and how it came up. So totalitarianism was, for Hannah Arendt, it was the effect of a political crisis. We already saw the political crisis because we have addressed these three thinkers, Nietzsche, Weber, Schmidt. We understand that it was, a crisis of the modern institutions of the liberal democracies coming up. So there was a crisis, which was also an economic crisis, which was also a moral crisis, and so on, especially after the First World War. Okay? So, right after the First World War, most Europeans believed that they were the most advanced, civilized, and progressive people in human history. But 30 years later, millions of dead, great cities in ruin, and the smell of death camps permeating the continent. So we entered the 20th century, which, Europeans say, oh my gosh, we have established such a great civilization. We even have industrialization, prosperity, we have universal suffrage, we have invented human rights. So we entered the 20th century very happy, but then 30 years later, millions of dead, 2 world wars, extermination camps, and so on, and so forth. So Hannah Arendt, she was addressing this. How did it came? Through, this, the growth of these totalitarian regimes. So, and she said, totalitarian regimes, they grew up through racism and imperialism. So there is this, the first thing is this, growth of the idea of nation in terms of race, in terms of racism, in terms of, say, my nation is superior than the other nation. So my race is superior. There is a, anthropological superiority. So there is racism, and this racism, brought to see, the enemies, the threat for the nation, for the blood of the nation. And so this brought up, anti-Semitism, in which they said, yeah, we have this Jewish elite in Europe, and this Jewish, they're controlling the banking system, they're the rich one, and so on and so forth. So this racism focused a lot against Jewish people. And this is, this racism, it's, the first element. So totalitarianism is based on a kind of nationalist racism. nationalist suprematism. And then, you replace, and from a replacement of all prior political institutions with new ones that are explicitly subordinated to the state. So you have a state which takes all the power and use terror, both as a means of political control and then as ideology, as ideological justification. So fear, terror, totalitarianism is based on the use of terror and of fear as a political means, And then there is not anymore the society. How is society? Totalitarianism tries to make a mass society. A mass society is a mass in which you have all the individuals isolated. All individuals very much isolated. It's not anymore a society which is divided into different communities, into different groups, into different social classes. No, it's a mass society in which you have this huge mass, and within the mass you have isolated individuals. So it's based on the mass society. On the mass society. The masses applies only where we deal with people who either, because of sheer numbers of indifference or a combination of both, cannot be integrated into any organization based on the common interest, into political parties or municipal governments or professional associations or trade unions. So that, you have the state, you have the strong state, and then you have the mass society with individuals. You don't have any more intermediate bodies, you don't have trade unions, you don't have political parties, you don't have association, you have the state versus the individuals of the mass society. The masses grew out of the fragmented, of a highly atomized society, whose competitive structure and concomitant loneliness of the individual had been held in check only through membership in a class. So we have this mass society that, favor the totalitarian movement. The totalitarian movement will grow through propaganda, which is, the extension of lies. Nowadays we would call it fake news, the spread of fake news. And then you have this society which is isolated, which is individualized, so people can buy the fake news, the propaganda, So you have this development of mass propaganda in front of this audience of isolated people. So totalitarianism, you have a mass society, you have an ideology which is a racist ideology, and you have the use of terror and violence as a means of domination. And then you have this vertical relationship with a strong leader. Totalitarianism always requires a leader which is not based on, bureaucratic power or rational power or a power which is based on laws, on rules and so on, but which is pure charismatic, in which you have a leader which look at the mass society and say, I'm the embodiment of the mass society. I'm kind of expressing the voice of the people, the voice of this nation. There is an identification between myself and this holistic body of the nation, this abstract body of a nation, this mass society, which I totally represent. So this is how, according to Arendt, the totalitarian power was built as a tool of total domination. And so then, she said, the extermination camp, the concentration camp, is the quintessential expression of the totalitarian power, because in extermination camp you have individuals with no any more power, any more agency, any more voice, which is completely, as completely subordinated to this power, huge power of the state, which have total power over his life or his death. So she called the concentration camps the laboratory of totalitarianism, which express the subordination of all other interests to the ideology of the regime and are essential to the survival of the regime. So she says this is a new form of government, totalitarianism. We see that we study traditional form of government, monarchy, empires, aristocracies, oligarchies, and so on. And she said this totalitarianism is a new form of government, which become possible with the mass society, which become possible through new technological means of the domination of the media, of the communication, and the build to the destruction of the civil society. So, centralized control by autocratic authority, the political concept that the citizen should be totally subject to an absolute state authority, and the organization of the mass. So this according to Arendt is a modern phenomenon. It's something new, something that emerged in her time and found this embodiment first of all in Nazi Germany, but also in the USSR under Joseph Stalin rules. So she said this is a moment of this time in which we have this level of technological development that allows the power to control the society in new ways, through new means of communication, through new means of power, through new weapons, and through new technological development that can be used by the power to control society. So it's something new, it's a distinct form of government.